Behind me is Crouch End Railway Station, a former railway line which was once an area of folklore where children would prank each other to run down it back and forth, thinking that if they didn't get to the other side they might go missing. Now, quite bizarrely, around the same time as the folklore, something very, very real was happening here in this part of London, and people were going missing at quite alarming rates. Because between the late 70s and early 80s in this area worked one of Britain's most disturbing and notorious serial killers, Dennis Nilsen.
Mass murder in London, there could be 16 bodies. Good evening. The police in London are engaged in what could be Britain's biggest mass murder investigation involving up to 16 deaths. 3 dismembered bodies have been found beneath a house at Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill, North London, and police are now searching a house in Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood, where it's believed traces of another 13 bodies may be found. The 3 dismembered bodies already found were all of young men. 2 heads were found inside the house. One of the men's been identified as Stephen Neil Sinclair, who was 20 and of no fixed address. The police have arrested a former Scots policeman who has worked for the homeless. Robin White reports.
The search started here at a semi-detached house in North London's Bedsit land. A plumber had been called out to unblock the pipes after complaints about the smell. Inside he found what looked like meat, then overnight it vanished.
We rang the police from the house the next day after the mass had mysteriously disappeared from the manhole.
So on Tuesday night there was a lot of flesh, a lot of meat in the manhole. And when you went back on Wednesday morning, it had all gone?
Yeah, completely.
But later police found parts of the bodies of 2 or 3 men, and a man was taken away for questioning. A next-door neighbour saw the police arrive.
Well, it was about 8 o'clock, and the police came to the front door and said, could they go in my garden? So I said, yes, there's no reason why they shouldn't. Then they said, there's something unpleasant going on next door. So I said, which way? And they pointed that way. So I said, yes, carry on. So they came down through here, down to the garden, and they were up and down with torches. But I don't know what they did.
The search then moved here to another house a few miles away in Cricklewood. From what they'd learned, the police started looking for up to 13 more bodies. It's believed they could be tramps and vagrants from a nearby hostel. Police have now sealed off the premises and cordoned off a large area of waste ground behind. They're going to start a more thorough examination tomorrow morning. The house has been standing empty for some time, and neighbours say had previously been used as an unofficial home for squatters and vagrants. Robin White, News at 10, North London.
The man police picked up from a Muswell Hill bedsitter last night is still being held here at Hornsey Police Station in North London. Police are saying very little about what's going to happen to him, but it's expected that he'll be charged tomorrow. I understand that at one time he was a policeman himself for at least a year before he left to join a private security firm. Then he went on to the Manpower Services Commission as a civil servant. He's thought to be in his late 30s or early 40s and to come from Aberdeen in Scotland. And it's likely he'll appear tomorrow at Highgate or Tottenham Magistrates Court. Carol Barnes, News at 10, Hornsey in North London.
Dennis Nilsen was a Scottish serial killer active in London between 1978 and 1983. He is known to have murdered at least 12 young boys and men, though the number could be much higher. His victims were often vulnerable people or those who might not be missed, runaways, homeless men, or men that he'd met in pubs. He would lure them back to his house with offers of food, alcohol, or shelter. His typical method of dispatch was strangulation, drowning, but then he would keep the bodies in his flat for some time before dismembering them and disposing of them. He was finally arrested in 1983 and convicted of multiple murders, found guilty and sentenced to life. Some of his victims were named many years later. Some still remain unknown. So Nilsen moved to London and his first address was Melrose Avenue. And it was whilst he was there, he began his murder spree. And he would pick people up in pubs or homeless people outside on the street and take them back to his place. And because he was such a lonely person, the very thought that these people might leave the next day was enough to make him kill. And then when he killed them in the most horrific ways, he would keep them in the house. He would sit them in the chair. He would head off to work and come back and start speaking to them like they were normal, awake people. But obviously they weren't. And then obviously over time they began to decompose and everything else, and then it's time to get rid of that body and move on to the next one. And he would generally chop them up, go outside into his garden and light a fire. So here's a look through some of the victims of Melrose Avenue, and we are not going to film that today. It is still lived in. It's my most recent research on it was it is a very exclusive house for a young family who moved in, and it is their dream home. So I'm not going to go and pinpoint that one. But yeah, after he moved from there, his landlord I think kicked him out because he needed to do some work on the property. He moved to the place we are going to show you, which is number 21, I think, Cranley Gardens. And it was at Cranley Gardens his killing spree continued, but also where he was caught. Nilsen's first murder was at Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood, and he killed 14-year-old Stephen Holmes on December 30th, 1978. Holmes had actually been heading back from a concert. He strangled Holmes and then drowned him. He would often place the body in chairs and talk to it, or we would put the body in bed, and he would keep the body beneath the floorboards for 8 months. As Stephen's body decomposed, he held a bonfire in his garden and burned the remains there. Stephen was not identified as a victim of Nilsen for over 30 years. In the next 3 years, he would kill again and again, including Kevin Ockenden, 23, Martin Duffy, 16, William Sutherland, 26, and 4 other unidentified victims. All would be kept in his house until eventually burned on a bonfire in his garden. His final victim at this address was 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow. In mid-1981, Nilsen had to leave the property as his landlord was planning renovations. As mentioned, the house still stands today.
Thank you, Michael, and hello. Dennis Nilsen, the man who once called himself the murderer of the century, tonight starts a life sentence for 6 murders in North London. He once boasted he could have killed 500 people had he not been stopped. The judge at the Old Bailey said he should stay in prison for at least 25 years. Nilsen, a 37-year-old civil servant, showed no emotion as sentence was passed. He denied murdering 6 young men between 1980 and 1982. He admitted killing them and maybe 9 more and cutting up their bodies at houses where he lived in Cricklewood and Muswell Hill. But Nilsen claimed it was manslaughter because of diminished responsibility. 8 or even 9 of his victims to this day remain unidentified. Young men with no names, no known addresses, jobless, rootless and friendless. Some were Scots, some were Irish, others were described as vagrants, hippies and skinheads. And as Stephen Chambers now reports, there are many more just like them, alone in London tonight.
No one will give a precise figure on the number of young people sleeping rough in London tonight, except to say the problem's getting worse by the moment, with middle-class southerners now joining the traditional working-class emigres from the north in the hunt for that elusive job.
How long have you been in London?
Just over a week.
Why on earth did you come down here?
There's a sad hole in Liverpool. It's simple. There's no work. Even my man, my dad, has been out of work for 9 years. Only just got a job now. Sitting guilds in all sorts, electricals, plumbing, anything. You just can't get anything. So what have I got down there? No future at all.
Jimmy's lucky. He's got a bed in the dormitory here at the Centrepoint Hostel in Soho, but with space limited and the demand vast, it can only be temporary. but the staff here will help with social security and other problems before turfing him out again.
Well, yes, I think we might have some space. If you could bring John Abel down to our gate and we'll interview him to let him in.
But however many such voluntary agencies may shelter at night, there's little that can be done to fill their days and their pockets. With lengthening dole queues and barely enough state cash for even the basic necessities like food, many young drifters find other alternatives.
And what about the business of male prostitution, which is fairly rife around here as well?
Well, we see them around. I've got at least 2 friends who are, but
because they want to
life. Be? I'm not too sure. They don't talk about it much. Whether they enjoy it or not is up to them. It's their life.
They make money, presumably, out of it?
Yes.
Good money?
I don't know. They've always got money in their pockets.
And the police, particularly the West End Street Offences Squad, are only too aware that the rootless youngster represents not only a potential criminal, but also a potential victim, as the Nilsen trial all too vividly revealed.
When you get young people on their own in the West End without really much experience of life, they can become involved through the many other sordid characters that we have in the area. They could indeed become victims in a similar fashion.
Despite run-ins with the police, the newcomers like Jimmy and Jason remain confident that with a lucky break, a good deal perhaps, all will work out. The long-standing drifters, though, find the facade of confidence more difficult to maintain.
What are your feelings at the moment, though? I mean, are you frustrated, lonely?
No, not really. No, I'm just hoping that it just changes, but so far it hasn't.
What do you see yourself doing in, say, a year's time?
I'm in a bed sitting something and getting a job.
Do you think that's really likely?
No, not a chance.
And with no hope and no money, the temptations come easy. The prospect of a free drink and meal virtually irresistible, no matter the real motives of the person making the offer. This is Stephen Chambers in the West End.
A sad story behind the Dennis Nilsen case.
Right, so now we're in Muswell Hill area of London, and a bit further on we're going to turn onto Cranley Gardens. And Nilsen moved into the top floor flat, and he was continuing his crimes, killing boys, and the issue there he had was that he couldn't obviously put the bodies in the garden or burn them in the garden like he'd been doing. So he had to find a new way of disposal, and it actually ended up that he was putting, he would chop up the bodies and put them down the drain, essentially. Anyway, the smell was obviously pretty horrendous, and at one point there was a phone call made for people to come and check the sewage system outside the house. And when they opened the drains there, they made the most horrifying discovery. No. Here at Cranley Gardens, the bodies were dismembered, stored in bags, in wardrobes, in drawers or under the bath. He would boil the body parts to remove the flesh, then flush the remains down the toilet. This disposal method did eventually lead to his downfall. At least 3 victims are known to have perished at this address. John Howlett was 23 when he was murdered in March 1982. Nilsen strangled him whilst he slept and then drowned him in the bath after he started fighting back. Archibald Graham Allen was 27 and murdered in September 1982. He was lured to the flat for dinner before also being killed. Stephen Sinclair was murdered on the 26th of January 1983. He was Nilsen's final victim. Sinclair was a heroin addict and homeless, and he strangled him with a tie. There were occasionally survivors of Nilsen's attacks. Paul Nobbs was non-fatally strangled and survived. Toshimitsu Wazawa also was attempted to be strangled but escaped. Another survivor was this man, Carl Stotter, who met Nilsen at the Black Cat pub in Camden in May 1982 and went back with him to Cranley Gardens. Nilsen attempted to strangle and drown Stotter, But he survived, and Stotter for years actually presumed that Nilsen had saved him and cared for him. The problem for any of the survivors, of course, was what could they do next? They'd survived an attack, but it was a homosexual encounter, which the police would not have viewed as seriously back in the day. Right, so now we're on Cranley Gardens and the house is on here. Obviously we're going to do this as well as we can, so I'm not going to go pointing the camera directly at somebody's house. People are living in it today. I find it quite a surprise that both this house and his other house still stand today, and I don't know if it's just because they are in quite good areas. If you think of other houses of serial killers, they're usually erased entirely, flattened and removed from memory. Now, I don't know if that's because the people that Nilsen killed weren't from round here. They were strangers, and so there's no families specifically connected to anything that happened here. But I don't know. It's interesting that they're both here, but it is just on the right.
The house isn't in good condition, but it does have vacant possession and a unique history. All the tenants of 23 Cranley Gardens, Muswell Hill, moved out last February, shortly after police arrested Dennis Nilsen, a homosexual civil servant jailed at the beginning of this month for 6 murders and 2 attempted murders. The man who told police he'd killed a total of 16 men and that he felt no pity for his victims. He even boiled parts of them in his kitchen.
When I realised what had been happening next door, I felt ill. It was horrible. I used to smell the cooking. I didn't know what it was. I do now, and after the event.
3 of Nilsen's victims were chopped up here in the front room of his top-floor flat. Police removed human limbs from this room. Now they've fumigated and redecorated the whole flat and replaced all the plumbing. The house's owner, an Indian housewife, wants a quick sale. There's no fixed price. The house is open to offers.
It could be that the property won't sell at all, or it could be that it will fetch an astronomical price.
Houses round here normally do sell quite easily, don't they?
Yes, they do. They do. I understand that the value, if it was not affected by the incident, will be in the region of 60 to 70,000.
How are you going to sort out people who want to come and look at the house, people who actually might want to buy it, and others who just want to have a look?
Yes, we haven't actually decided how to deal with this problem. We do anticipate getting a number of time wasters, people that just want to sightsee and come along and have a look. I suppose we'll have to have an open day or something just to let people come and have a look.
There have already been 3 offers for 23 Cranley Gardens, and a film company may rent the house to make a film of Dennis Nilsen's grisly and incredible story. Ros Morris in Muswell Hill for Thames News.
Nilsen lived in the top flat here, and when he disposed of the bodies, he put them into the pipe and it went into the sewage system just outside. And when they came and opened the drains, they found all sorts of bits of bones and chunks of flesh, and they traced it to the pipe that goes into the house here. So they obviously found out who it was. The house belongs to Dennis Nilsen. They came and arrested him, and he immediately confessed. He said, "Oh, you've got me. Yes, it's me who's done it." And 3 people were killed in that top floor flat. They found chunks of the bodies in dustbin bags under the bath, in the cupboards and everything else. Pretty horrendous, and yeah. Dennis Nilsen was sentenced to life imprisonment on the 4th of November 1983. Initially recommended to 25 years, but this was later changed to a whole life tariff. He didn't lodge an appeal and accepted the Crown's decision. Nilsen died in May 2018, aged 72. In modern times, only Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and Harold Shipman have more victims to their name. Okay folks, there we go. That is the story of the rather notorious serial killer Dennis Nilsen and a visit to Cranley Gardens. Now, often when we do these stories, we always try and focus on the victims and make it more about them. This story is much more difficult because a lot of the victims are even unknown today. They were just bodies found and were never connected to anybody. Some of the victims he named 30 years later, which must have been awful for some of the families to not know what had happened to people and find out after such a long length of time. But yeah, Nilsen is one of those where, you know, you think of serial killers in movies and things like that. They are these, you know, crazy evil types. Nilsen was perhaps the most boring person imaginable and would never have stood out. But at least he was caught due to his own actions of putting the bodies down the drain. Anything to add? No. It is a nice spot, Cranley Gardens. It is a lovely, lovely, like leafy lane. Okay guys, we'll leave you from here in Muswell Hill and see you for the next video very soon. Take care.